Explore Guyana's business landscape with Above Board, brought to you by Cerulean Incorporated. Join host Lindell Danzy Black as she interviews top business leaders, revealing insights into thriving industries and investment opportunities. Covering tech innovations to entrepreneurial strategies, Above Board is your guide to successful investing in Guyana. Dive into prosperity with us. Your journey to insights and opportunity starts here.
Good day. Welcome to Above Board. I am your host, Lindell Danzy Black. Today's guest is Mr. John Edghill. Mr. Edghill is the Senior Director of Investment at the Guyana Office for Investment. Mr. Edghill promotes and facilitates investment in Guyana and exports out of Guyana for all categories of businesses: local, foreign direct investment, joint ventures, and small and medium-sized enterprises. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Edghill.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Lindell, for having me. I understand that I'm your first guest on this particular podcast. And I also want to say a special hi to everyone that will be watching, whether you're from the Caribbean, the diaspora, Europe, Asia. We don't know because everyone has their eyes on Guyana. So I can definitely say that this podcast will make its ears and eyes to persons from all over this world. So wherever you're watching from, I want to give you a very good and gracious Guyanese hello. And I hope that this conversation will be very beneficial to you. So as you said, Lindell, I've worked across Guyana for some amount of years at this point in time, especially as it relates to doing some government-related work and working directly with the private sector. As it relates to my experience in the oil and gas industry, obviously over the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, that has been industry that has been the main propellant of all of the other dynamics of the economy. So whenever anyone thinks about Guyana, besides sometimes our great food and Kaicho Falls, the main thing they think about is the oil and gas industry. So just by extension of being in the Commerce and Industry Ministry and having to liaise directly with those players and some of the adjunct members of the private sector, I have been in close contact with many of those particular officials. Guyana's oil and gas industry is, I know, a conversation that we can have for hours and hours. So I don't want to just steer down my rabbit hole, but I'll allow you to get into whatever specifics we can talk about here today, but it's really fascinating.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And definitely, those who are listening, we want to really invite you to Guyana because the Kaicho Falls, the food, the people, it is just one great big cook-up. So you must find out what a cook-up is in Guyana. Okay, so as it relates to the the oil and gas industry again, I wanted to ask you, how have recent oil discoveries in your mind impacted the economy and even the investment landscape in Guyana? What are your thoughts on that?
All right. So like I just mentioned, and you've talked about even in your introduction, oil and gas has basically put Guyana on the map. Well, more on the map, right? So
Indeed.
Before, if you ask someone where's Guyana, they might mistake it and say Ghana, which is in a whole different continent. But now when you say Guyana, everyone can pinpoint to that place on the northern side of the South American continent and be able to find Guyana because persons are coming in droves to be able to explore the land of opportunity. But like many other countries, the story can be told for many other countries. We're having a similar phenomenon. What oil and gas can do for an economy is simply magnificent. If we look at 5 decades ago of Dubai, and Dubai is probably a tourism pinnacle right now. Dubai was in large part desert. And when you go to Dubai now, you can find the world's largest this, the world's largest that, the most excursions, right? And people are flocking to those countries because of the impact of the resource. So as we know, we need that oil and gas resource for everything in our daily lives. And that's why it's so valuable. So I don't have to get into the conversation about how valuable that oil and gas resource is. But what the oil and gas resource can do for an economy can simply be shown by some of our national budgets that we've had. So we've been utilizing oil and gas resource for maybe 2 to 3 years at this point in time after we would have started production. If you look at a budget for maybe 2018, the entire budget for 2018 might not even be the budget for one ministry right now. And that is because of the amount of new revenue that we're having. So essentially, government just has two revenue sources. You have your taxes and you have earned revenue in the case of selling your natural resources or whatever publicly traded enterprises. So of course, we know that we've had industries in Guyana like the sugar industry, the rice industry, the entire agricultural industry, which includes shrimp production and aquaponics and all of these things, and tourism. But because our oil and gas resource is so magnanimous, and we're now pumping out that oil, we are able to basically, in some cases, 3x our budget. We've had budgets that have surpassed 500 billion Guyana dollars now. And if we had told someone that we would be able to do that 4 years ago, and I'm going back to the soonest possible time in the past, because 4 years ago, things were looking much differently. So the entire budget from a few years ago is not even equivalent to a Ministry of Public Works budget, and that ministry will only be in charge of doing public roads, bridges, main access roads, bridges, and so forth. So the new revenue that government has at its disposal obviously allows it to be able to put new initiatives in place. And for many years, persons have talked about what needs to be done in Guyana. We know that we need to build out all our access roads. And what does that allow? That allows both agricultural production and it allows tourism potential to be unlocked. So I'll give you a quick example. Mainstay Resort, located in Essequibo, every weekend is filled. And that is known to everyone. It's filled every single weekend. But many persons didn't want to even go down to Mainstay because of a poor road. So now you have an asphaltic road taking you into Mainstay, and also the persons who live in Mainstay can now be able to take out their produce and be able to sell to persons on the coast, persons in Region 3, persons in Region 4, and even further afield now. And that's just a simple example of one particular Amerindian village. And I know
Right.
we would want to get into some talk about some of the other projects being done.
Absolutely.
But just definitely the amount of new resource that government is able to unlock is what has really kind of unlocked that potential for all the other industries. So of course, we know that we won't be able to pump oil for years on end. And then there are some persons who are really pushing that conversation to end oil and gas production because of obviously the
environmental issues. Yes,
exactly. So we need to get to maximum production as fast as possible. But in doing so, the investments that are being made in the other sectors is what is really driving international investment. So let me give you another example before we move off this topic, because I think this one is very key and critical. In early 2020 or mid 2020, one of the first things that was done in terms of an investment was not even paid for by the government. All the government said was, okay, we know that we have oil and gas resource and we're pumping oil, and we're going to be making investments in all these areas. We need to have internationally branded hotels. So they put out concessions and expressions of interest so that persons can have opportunity to be able to construct those brand name hotels here. And now we have more than 5 hotels under construction. And that's just because we know the resource that we have and what are the investments that are going to be placed in what particular areas.
And we heard recently that the Marriott close to the airport is almost done, right? So that speaks to what you were saying. Thank you so much for that, John. We already started over the years seeing the increase in investment coming in, or the investment flow coming into Guyana. One of the questions that I have for you is about the whole regulatory and policies governing the investment climate, because anyone coming in would be interested to know about the regulatory and the governing policies, especially because those investors are coming into to private sector environments that had already been working. So, what would you say are some of the regulatory regulations and policies governing the foreign investment in Guyana that persons interested in coming into Guyana would want to know?
All right. So I like to be very transparent. I like to be
Indeed.
very open when I speak to investors about these particular things. And every country has its own bureaucracy. So in the regulatory environment, obviously there's bureaucracy intended to protect the national patrimony, and is also intended to stamp out corruption and things of that nature. So I will start with some of those things first. Things like having a building permit, because truth be told, and I'm sure someone listening here will want to know, how can we get land in Guyana to build something? Right? That's always one of the most popular questions. How can we get land to build something? Right? And I can answer that question. And the most feasible way that I can answer it is to go on the open market, because obviously there are many persons in Guyana seeking land for their own personal development. So you have to manage the interests of a foreign investor wanting land to develop versus thousands of local persons who have housing interests and housing needs. So in many cases, it's better to go on the open market, even though it will be a pricier penny, and be able to find land there. But let's speak a little bit about the regulatory environment. In every country, you have to operate within what are the laws and the norms. And every international investor is well aware of that. I believe the government has acknowledged that many of the bureaucracy cannot work. And things like a building permit, that before you would have to take it from the Ministry of Housing to Central Housing and Planning, to the Fire Service, to City Council, to get a man to do your sewage and everything of the sort. A building permit, and I started there because many of the persons who are going to come in would have to face some of those bureaucratic indices, if you want to call it that. And before, when the World Bank was using the doing business reform and ease of doing business index, you would have been seeing what were some of those bottlenecks in that particular structure. So what is being done right now is that a single window for building permits is being set up. It's not yet fully in place, but that will obviously allow a more cohesive process to be done, and that you don't have to actually send a representative in country to just be running from organization to organization. So that is something I think that is noteworthy, that should be checked out very, very, very keenly by anyone watching this particular podcast. Similarly, when it comes to matters of trade, import and export, and there are many persons who would come to do trade of US-based products, Chinese-based products, European, and all types of other items. There are trade permits that you will obviously have to get. The Ministry of Commerce is responsible for those permits, and with endorsing agencies attached to that particular permit. So for example, if you want to have pesticides, there's a pesticides board that will have to endorse that particular permit or request for permit that you'll have. So there's several different endorsing agencies alongside that particular structure. So again, similar to what was happening in the bureaucracy of the building permits, you can be running from agency to agency, trying to get those endorsements or trying to get things moving between the seams. So again, in that particular instance, a single window is being set up for trade that will govern both import and export licenses. And I think that's something that should be lauded, and also that some of the international investors should know. When it comes to taxes are obviously sector specific, right? So if you're going to come as a corporation, and I hesitate to even call some of the numbers, because depending on when you're looking at this podcast too, there can be fluctuations in some of those particular things. What I'd want to highly encourage is that GRE has a very good website as it relates to looking at sector-specific tax structures. So that's the Guyana Revenue Authority website. And at any point in time that you listen to this, I'm sure that website will still be live and it will still be carrying more up-to-date information than I can be able to cite at any point in time. So having a look at the Guyana Revenue Authority website will help you to be guided on what is the current tax structure, because obviously as part of budgetary presentations, those things will change. What will not change, however, is government's approach to dealing with international investors as it relates to concessions and having duty-free and those types of things, because that is, of course, a very big impetus towards having those persons come in and actually be able to invest. The agency that is set up for that is called the Guyana Office for Investment, and their mandate is actually towards bringing in those types of persons. But the government, of course, understands that they want to fast track the development of our country. And in many cases, where you're able to sort of match what the government's mandate is. So let's say what the government has said, and the president has said that he wants to create 50,000 jobs by the end of his first term, 2025. So if in your proposal, you can show how you're adding to the government's mandate, it's in your best interest to be able to benefit from some of those tax concessions. And in many sectors, again, having a conversation with the Guyana Office of Investment is very important, because what they will do is after you've presented that proposal, you can get what is called an investment agreement. And in that investment agreement, you have a lot of benefit, but with any benefit, you have responsibility. So as part of your responsibility, you will have to outline what is your plan. So if you say to the government and you are a call center, for example, that you want to employ 10,000 persons, you will say how you will do that on an annualized basis. What are the investments that you will be making in Guyana? What are the investments that you're going to be making in the capacity building, training, and development of our people? And in that instance, then the government might be more inclined to say to you, okay, we know that you have to bring in all of your headsets, all of your laptops, all of your equipment, and then we can give you a write-off for the duty that you might have to pay to import all of those things, do relocation, and those types of things. So in those cases, you can have what is called more or less of a incentivized and a specialized package curated to you
for
towards
that.
promoting your development. Yes.
John,
So yes.
You spoke about, and thank you for sharing that. You spoke about the infrastructural projects, a few minutes ago, that the government has been pushing forward to the investment, to the investors coming in. We spoke about Marriott being one of them. Can you tell us about any other infrastructural, large infrastructural project that's ongoing, that's noteworthy, to those persons who may be interested in coming into Guyana?
Certainly. And I want to start with, which is probably my favorite one, because Guyanese would tell you that every year around Christmas time, we start to get blackouts. So the gas to energy project, that is a project that is expected to be completed by 2025, that should cut the cost of electricity in half, as well as improve our reliability of power. So what we have right now, and I believe, again, I don't like to always cite numbers because sometimes these things fluctuate, but I believe right now it's 35 cents per kilowatt hour, which I think is about maybe 4 times as high as the rate in the United States and some of the developed world. So what that does for you, or a marketing, or not marketing, but more or less of a manufacturing sector, is that defeats the sector, because electricity is one of your most integral costs as part of your entire bottom line. So if you're able to cut that in half, and then more importantly, in my opinion, improve the reliability of it, because in many cases, and again, going back to the colloquial Guyanese example, some persons have had blenders being destroyed and things like that. So think about it on an industrialized basis now, where you're relying on a power supply for your industrialized machines that can anytime, because of fluctuations in power, become destroyed. That has for a long time plagued our manufacturing industry, because you would not want to make an investment into any new machinery because you have to be very afraid and very cognizant of the very real challenges, or you have to make an additional investment to have your own electricity supply. But the gas energy power plant, that is expected to be completed by 2025, and that will cut the cost of electricity in half. Secondly, the Linden to Mabura Road, another project I'm very excited about, and that's because that really connects the entire country together. Where we're talking to you from right now is in a lovely place called Georgetown in Region 4. Region 4 connects to, when you go southern, about 2 hours drive, or if you drive like me, you can get there in an hour and a half to Linden, and that's in Region 10. If you go further south, you can get to Region 9, and Region 9 sits at a border town with a very large trade bloc and the largest country in South America, the 5th largest country in the world, which is Brazil. And Brazil has been a very good trade partner for us. Brazil literally built a bridge to connect Guyana to Brazil.
To Brazil,
that is,
yes.
Exactly. That is the
Exactly.
kind of trade partner that we have heading south. But we have not been able to do justice of that particular relationship. And why is that? Because we have most of the activity occurring in our capital city, with the impossibility of getting produce and products all the way to Region 9. So currently what we have is a trail. The trail is being maintained from time to time, but whenever there's rainfall, yes, we go back into the same slope of not being able to have trucks. And then we were using timber bridges as well. So trucks could only carry a certain load. And that actually hurt as well the competitiveness of those particular manufacturers again, and persons involved in trade. Because if you can only take a certain load, that means that you have to put more trucks on the road with less load, and you can't move as much produce. But along with that project, all of the timber bridges, I believe it's 40 plus, will be converted from timber to concrete superstructures, as well as asphalting of that entire stretch from Linden to Mabura, and then as funding allows, all the way to Letem. And I know funding is being sought right now. And that project has already started. I believe some 1,000 kilometers of road has already been paved. So if you go right now on that road, you will be able to access some parts of the Linden to Mabura stretch. But before I move off that point, a very critical point I want to make, that entire stretch is not currently urbanized. So you have the fresh potential to be able to put up malls, put up all types of urbanization, commercial centers. So you have an entire area where traffic will be moving that is pretty much untouched. And you have access to Linden, which is one of the most tourism sought spots in Guyana right now.
In Guyana. So there are great opportunities that are direct, indirect, and induced as a result of the activities there. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. We spoke about the infrastructure and infrastructural development that's here, and we kind of hinted or touched on the energy sector. Let's think about opportunities that exist in the non-energy sector, because I know that you were quite integral in tourism, in maritime transport. There were quite a few things that you worked on, and I'm just wondering, could you tell us a little bit about those non-energy sectors that can benefit the country and be of investment, opportunities to persons looking in?
Certainly. So I want to start with tourism. And right now, Guyana is actually celebrating its Tourism Awareness Month. So I would encourage you to all come and experience what we have to offer. It's currently our Tourism Awareness Month, and we'd be so happy to welcome you. But all parts of Guyana, because of those investments, our tourism potential is truly increasing. I just spoke a little bit about the potential of Region 10. Region 10, because of its tourism committee and works of the government, has become a tourism hotspot, really and truly. and that is driven primarily by domestic tourism. So Region 10 has the Blue Lake, so there's access for kayaking and so forth. The Essequibo has 4 Great Lakes, and only one of them is being utilized in a private public partnership, and that is Mainstay Resort. But you have places like Mashabo, you have places like Lake Kapui and the Hot and Cold Lake that have literal beautiful black water waiting to have that particular potential. But one of the things that we wanted to push is to have at least one world-class eco lodge being set up here. So if anyone is looking at opportunities, that is one thing that the government had on its wish list, more or less, to have a world-class eco lodge being set up. But I might have to, the best approach sometimes to talking tourism is to show you things on a map.
Absolutely.
But the
But John,
interconnectivity.
I even recalled the head of the Go Invest doing a presentation and actually showing the what the vision is for that eco
Yeah.
lodge. So the Go Invest does have a website as well. So I'm sure our listeners can take a look at the Go Invest website, and they would probably see what you're talking about, because I was quite in awed when I saw that presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
But as it relates to some of the other non-oil related things,
Yes.
Guyana is forging ahead as a leader in agriculture in the CARICOM. That is our Caribbean community, and the president, who in the more or less quasi cabinet of the CARICOM or the Caribbean community, he is the Minister of Agriculture, so to say. So Guyana, by being that leader in CARICOM, we have a very strong agricultural agenda and push. So there are several products and produce that we need to bring down our food import bill by. So all the Caribbean countries have been tasked with reducing their food import bill by at least 25%. Things like dairy, very, very important, because we're importing those things from North America. But if they're done locally with the right expertise, they can be farmed and produced at a very economical rate, and even done so competitively in the international market. So there's an entire slew of opportunities that relates to agriculture. So you can look literally line by line with different agricultural produce, and especially the non-traditional agricultural produce. And I mean things away from rice and sugarcane. So if we're looking at value-added agricultural produce, those are things that the government is very interested at this point in time. As it relates to the services sector, because like I mentioned, there's a strong push towards the employment and reducing youth unemployment. Things like business process outsourcing and call centers have become very popular. And Guyana, as you should know, is the only English-speaking country in South America.
South America.
Right. And our cost of labor, as compared to many of the other countries, is relatively low. So that is an advantage to many persons.
So you've literally just segued into my next question. So that's why I will come in and ask you about the labor market, because I am sure many people coming into such a space will want to know about the availability of skilled labor in Guyana, and what are some of the initiatives that we are undergoing to upskill, to retool our people. So that question would then now segue into what you were talking about, the whole issue of the labor market. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, anyone that you have a conversation with locally will tell you that right now it's hard to get workers. Whether you are a private man trying to build your house, or whether you are a contractor building a road, it has become very, very difficult to get skilled labor or labor in general. And that's because of a lot of the opportunities that exist and the competitive nature of firms operating in the local market. I believe it is an International Labor Organization study and I want to cite it correctly, um, but it was saying that there will be a substantial number of workers in the next 5 years, maybe 5 to 8,000 specialists that are going to be required that we don't currently have. So I know the University of Guyana just graduated its first petroleum engineering cohort, but that is a class of maybe 50 students, if I am using a positive estimate. And we have organizations such as the Board of Industrial Training, which is trying to do a lot of upskilling. And they're looking specifically at TVET, so that's the Technical Vocational Education Training. So having more electricians, having more carpenters, having more plumbers, because these are things that are needed, in addition to welders and fabricators and those types of things. But simply put, the supply, well, the demand is far outstripping our local supply. So obviously that is carrying up the cost of wages right now. And of course, it is not my policy to decide how it will be treated with in the future. But I have heard the vice president and the president making mention that as a short-term relief measure, similarly to what was done in Dubai, where in some cases you had to bring in imported labor to work on very specific projects, that will have to be a topic of conversation that government will have to really ventilate before that is done, because obviously we have real risk towards doing such things. But right now, the supply of labor, especially if you're going into the oil and gas industry in specific, or things like construction, it is very hard to get specialized labor at the moment.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. We look at labor, but now I want to turn to market entry strategies. What in your mind are some of the market entry strategies for foreign investors coming into Guyana? What are some of the recommendations that you have?
Okay. Typically, I'd want to give an answer based on the industry that is really on the question, because painting a broad brush of all industries with one strategy might be an ineffective strategy. But I can provide some general best practices of how things should be approached, and that is what I will provide. Our country right now is trying to maximize as much local participation and local development as possible. So gone are the days where we will allow a company to come in to pretty much raid national patrimony, export all the resources, and leave. What has to be seen as very, very important to that incoming investor, that incoming firm, that incoming company, is that local participation and local partnership is a goal that you should have in mind. And I'm being very careful with the use of words, because we have seen some pushback in our recent past where after the passage of a local content certification, we would have seen how that was even used as a more or less pseudo ticket to be able to benefit from some of the revenues that a very large operator in the form of ExxonMobil had to procure their services. So we do not, or we will not want to encourage anyone having more or less as a rent a Guyanese policy. So you are in your best interest to find someone locally who might not have your capacity, your level of funding, your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom, your knowledge transfer, or your technology even, and create, if you want to call it, a joint venture, partnership, but
Right.
that is your fastest route towards operating in Guyana.
Precise.
And that is
yeah, what I was actually coming to is the issue of the local partnerships and the joint ventures, and you've mentioned it, so thank you for doing that. And then to segue into the local content legislation, in that regard, to really tell people what is the local content regulations in Guyana, and how does that impact the whole local partnership, joint venture type of arrangement as we look at market entry?
Sure, sure. So let me just speak a little bit more about market entry, because I'm sure this will be a topic that many of your listeners really want to get ironed out. What I'm not saying is that you cannot survive on your own 2 feet in Guyana. What I'm saying is that the best approach is the partnership approach. If you want to come and to compete as a local, as a international firm, and just basically have a registered address, and you bid for contracts, and whenever you win a contract or whatever, you come to Guyana, that can be your approach. But from my understanding of the lay of the land, that will not lead to a very successful venture. Because, like I said, many things are being put in place, including the local content legislation which you referenced, and I believe that was passed in 2021. But that local content legislation has what is called a schedule that basically outlines a series of services that the oil and gas operators must procure from local persons. And that means you have to be born in Guyana, naturalized in Guyana, to be able to get that local content certification. So it is to ensure that Guyanese benefit from Guyanese resources. In many cases, or in cases, the company will have to be at least 51% owned by Guyanese. The majority of the management will have to be Guyanese. The majority of labor will have to be Guyanese. Most of the beneficial ownership will have to be going towards Guyanese. So this is to ensure that we don't have persons just creating a facade where it's a name, but in most cases, the business is just being run as a way and means to siphon out our resources. And to add some more context to this, and I want to plug your business here too, Linda, having a good local partner, such as Cerulean Management, allows you to understand the lay of the land. I know many persons when they come, and they may come to Guyana for 2 days visit, and then they have meetings with the Go Invest, the private sector, the Chambers of Commerce, and they do these very quick trade missions and trade talks, right? So you don't get a full understanding, and you're hearing a lot of content. You're hearing a lot of content, but you have to have someone who can be able to filter that for you strongly. So many cases, persons don't necessarily want to have a local consultant working on the ground for them. But I would actually encourage persons to do that. And that person is not really in charge of getting you into the room of anyone else and guaranteeing you a contract and those types of things. They are giving you a pulse of what's happening in the country. It's very hard for you sitting in wherever office you are overseas to understand the intricacies of a local environment and to also continuously monitor what is happening on the ground. Because we have a very dynamic country. You think you can't intend to read papers on Saturday and expect to know all that is happening in the country. If you miss one news cycle right now, and it's becoming we're becoming very similar to modern nations. You miss one news cycle, and then you're falling all the way behind. You don't understand what's happening in the economy anymore.
So that is true.
Finding very good persons like yourself, I would want to encourage that as well.
Thank you very much for that, John. There are just 3 other things that I want to talk about briefly. The first one is, the oil and gas industry brings with it a particular set of risk. What have you seen in terms of the change or the safety culture in Guyana over time? Because there is so much risk associated with the oil and gas industry. What are your thoughts on, where change has happened?
Well, if we look at the entire history, and I can speak directly to risk involved in the oil and gas industry and indirectly as well, or adjunct to the oil and gas industry. So when we first engaged ExxonMobil, nobody knew 20 years ago that we would be able to even have oil. So at that point in time, Exxon took on all the risk and they decided to venture and do all the seismic and 3D and everything else and all the geographic terms. I don't want to call any for fear of being inaccurate at this particular juncture, but all the risk was on those operators. And we have had controversy in the country because after oil was found, then everyone believed as though we knew all the time that there was oil there. So it is a case that nobody knew before, but now um, that dynamic has changed. So we have an older contract that was signed in 2018, and that was done with Exxon and their partners, CNOOC and Hess, and I believe Hess is being sold now to Chevron. But because we have had more or less of a testimonial, and we've been able to verify and to see how many barrels of oil we can produce, a lot of the risk is being eradicated because a lot of the information that you would have needed beforehand is now very much available, and the proof is in the earnings. So we have persons doing shallow drilling and bidding for those particular things. We have, I think now, two local persons winning bids, yes, to be able to explore oil and gas production. But as part of those new persons that have now won the last round of bids, they will be required to sign signing bonuses, and they will have even heftier penalties. As part of these contracts as well, there's expected to be things like corporation tax, which was not included in a previous PSA that was done in the old PSA in 2018. But that is now just because we've been able to more or less verify what is happening. But if we're looking indirectly and outside of the oil and gas sector, I think a lot of the local private sector is warming up to the idea of moving away from buying and just selling, or the trading economy. We've seen that things like our tourism potential is really there. So even an investment in tourism is now a reality. When the Guyana Marriott was built, many persons said that should have been a hospital or a school or something of the sort, because they said, who's coming to Guyana and make us need a Marriott? Now we will have about 3 or 4 Marriotts, because right now we don't have enough quality room stock to be able to house many local persons coming for things like our expos, trade fairs, or just to have day-to-day engagements. So I think some of the risk averse nature, not necessarily that was related with our financial institutions, because I think strongly that they have remained very risk averse, even in the face of increasing profit. But our local private sector is becoming very creative because they see that other sectors will be able to thrive, and they are actually making those investments into many other things.
Excellent. Thank you so
Yes.
much for sharing that. So my final question would be on the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a huge thing. Companies are now really, not just companies, but also governments are really moving into the whole issue of diversity, inclusion, especially of people who are living with disabilities, people who are in vulnerable positions, etc. What have you seen? Have you seen a shift? Have you seen any policy directions as it relates to this inclusion of everyone in the process?
Well, I want to answer that question and be able to separate it from what many of our listeners might be categorizing DEI as opposed to what it is in Guyana, because obviously we have a different culture system than they would have. So the DEI for many of those countries, if you're listening in North America, Canada, US, and those types of countries. DEI might mean ensuring that more women are involved in particular sectors, or ensuring that the person of the LGBT community is involved in the entire economy. I think that because many of our discriminatory practices are not on the basis of whether you're gender specific, but more or less on the basis of race in our particular country. We don't have gender wars over here. We have, in many cases, race-related conflicts. So DEI policy has not been carved out more or less as part of government mandate in terms of the employability of people. Obviously, what the president, and I think he has popularized two words more than any person in the entire world when he says one Guyana. Yes. So I think his entire platform of one Guyana and being able to absorb that policy into every single one of his initiatives is what's pushing our more or less diversity, equity, inclusion policy here in Guyana. So when he says one Guyana, he means that if you're living in Better Hope, the people of Better Hope who are getting contracts, or the people who are going to build the roads in Better Hope should be the people from Better Hope. Or in Region 10, when we're building roads there, they should be the people from Region 10. And this is able to empower all of the people. So you will have persons of Afro-Guyanese descent, Indo-Guyanese descent. And of course, different communities have different saturation of different persons. But I think the government's general approach has been predicated on those two words that the president, I believe, probably uses in every single one of his speeches. When he says we are one Guyana, and it's pushing in a different direction. And of course, an investment has been made in Berbice to actually have a commercial center for persons living with disabilities, right? And that's being spearheaded in large part by his wife, Her Excellency, the First Lady. And of course, the Ministry of Human Services. They are now working with some of the call centers to have persons living with disabilities be connected to some of those business process outsourcing services. So they might be able to work from home and things like that. So you might have a physical disability, not be able to go to the office, but there are many online jobs that you can take now. So those are some of the things that are being crafted out into the local sphere. Yes.
John, thank you. Thank you so much. You know, when it comes to Guyana, you and I can talk from now until the cows come home, as we say. But, I just want to thank you so much for this insightful discussion that we are having here. And also, before we move on, to ask you, is there at this time, are there any projects or any, the amount of insight you have, I'm almost thinking that you might have a book or something that you would like to tell us about in terms of, what are you doing in yourself of the woods? Is there anything that you'd like to talk to our audience about?
Well, I'd encourage anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn as it is right now. As it relates to my direct work, I'm transitioning into many things right now. But I want to remain as flexible as I can be. So I'm not trying to take on the world, as we say. But follow me on LinkedIn, and we can have a continuous conversation here or there. My name is, of course, John Edghill. I don't necessarily like to talk too much about myself. What I like to talk about is business and the business landscape in Guyana. I'd want to, again, encourage your listeners and anyone who might hear the sound of my voice to engage with local partners, starting with the ones who will give you a brief to the ones that will carry you all the way forward. So that would be my final take with this podcast. But Lindell, I really want to thank you for having me on. It has certainly been a very good pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, John. Listeners, one of the things that I can tell you, if you're looking for someone who understands the landscape of Guyana, a person who would talk to you very freely about where he sees his vision for Guyana. For me, I'm always very interested in people who have a vision, and John Edghill has a vision. He has a vision for where he wants to go personally, but more specifically, he has a vision for where Guyana, his Guyana, where he wants to take it, as well as where his various stakeholders want to take Guyana. And so I'd like you to really, connect with him on LinkedIn, talk to him. He's very open and willing and willing to help. John, I thank you so much for being part of Above Board, and you were our inaugural interviewee. So when we are celebrating 10 years, we will come back to you.
I'd appreciate that. I'd even like to be there too.
Oh, I know you will. Thank you so much.
Maybe by then I'll have the book.
I just know you here. I put it out there, right? So I'm looking forward to that book.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All
Have
right.
a good one, John. Bye-bye. This wraps up today's episode of Above Board, brought to you by Cerulean Incorporated. We are dedicated to elevating businesses in Guyana and the Caribbean through innovation, ethical practices, and high integrity, and a deep commitment to excellence. Cerulean is your partner in navigating the complexities of business growth and success. Are you planning to start or expand your business within the Guyanese market? Cerulean Incorporated is here to guide you. Learn more about how we can help by visiting www.cerulean-management.com or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Cerulean Inc. or Cerulean_Incorporated. Join us next time on Above Board, where we continue to unlock the potential for success in Guyana's thriving business landscape.